searching history for buried classics. This is Lost Treasures of Gaming.
Welcome to episode number 2 of Lost Treasures of Gaming. Thanks for joining us again. I am your host, Sean Evans, otherwise known as Zion Tane.
And I'm your other host, Sid Bolton, and I'm known as at Sid Bolton on Twitter or Dirk the Daring on Xbox and PSN.
And you are our...
gaming archaeologist.
Of course, don't forget that.
I think I already said that, Sean.
No, you didn't.
Didn't I? Roll the tape back.
We're very excited to be interviewing today David L. Clarke, who is the developer of a cult-followed game now called Sopwith, which came out in 1984. Isn't that right, Sid?
Yes, the very first version was written for the IBM PC in 1984, and it's definitely one of those games that has managed to survive in spite of itself in a lot of ways, so it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk to David. We're going to find out why it was created, what was the inspiration behind it. In fact, it's very interesting. The reason this game was created was not necessarily to create a game. It was actually created for a very different reason.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We'll talk to David to find out more about his background as well. But he's certainly not someone who got into programming to be a game designer, and so sometimes some of the best gaming products end up coming from unusual places, and I would say that this definitely falls into that category, and it's definitely a lost treasure for sure, because in a lot of ways this game maybe would have never made it out of the development inside the company and out into the public, but it has. And it's also nice because it's a game that you can freely download today. Don't have to worry about any legal issues or any kind of stuff like that. If you want to play the original, there's no fear about copyright infringement or anything else. So that's a nice thing about this game as well for those that are concerned about those sorts of things.
So Sid, in about 30 seconds, give us a quick synopsis of what Sopwith is.
Sopwith started out as a multiplayer game, but you can play it with a single player where you control an airplane and you get to shoot at things and fly and destroy buildings. And of course, if you played the multiplayer, you tried to take down the other planes as well. And the Sopwith is the plane that Snoopy is pretty famous for riding in.
That's right. Awesome. Well, without further ado, let's go talk to David and learn a little bit more about Sopwith. Welcome, David, to Lost Treasures of Gaming. Thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thank you. I'm very, very honored that people still remember the game.
Well, this was actually a Lost Treasures segment on the OMG Hour 2 weeks ago, and so you have the honor of being the first actual interview for Lost Treasures of Gaming.
Well, thank you.
You could go down in history for more than just Sopwith.
Yeah, and so I'm always trying to find interesting games, and yours has come up as one of those games that has managed to have a bit of a cult following after all these years. So that's pretty cool to have created something way back in the day, and then still have people that are interested in it today. So it's a really interesting game, and we talked about it in the Lost Treasure. I talked a couple of minutes about it, but it's really great to have you on the show so we can sort of ask you a little bit more about what you were thinking, or what you can remember of what you were thinking back at the time, because how long has it been now? It's been about 30 years since you created that game.
Yes, it is. And certainly a lot of the memories are very, very foggy. But yeah, I think I can answer some of your questions, anyways.
Well, why don't you start with just giving us a little bit about the game itself and kind of how did the game come to be?
Oh, well, okay. It was the company was B&B CompuScience out of Milton, and their main product was a proprietary network called Imaginet, and really I was hired as a developer first, and then we said, okay, what am I going to do there? And the first thing that I and the the owner of the company when we were chatting, saying, well, maybe we really needed a demo program for Imaginet, and so the idea came, my idea to say, what better demo than to actually have a multiplayer game, which would really demonstrate where networks are at the time. And so that was really it. So we just thought about what game we should develop, and basically, Bill McLean was the owner of the company at the time, and he sort of gave me free rein, and thought about it at probably a grand total of a few hours, and then just started coding Sopwith.
So, oh darn, you had to go to work and create a game, right?
To be honest, it was really hard sometimes to sit there, am I justifying my salary? But it was a good time.
So now, just a little bit, I wanted to ask a little bit about the company just before we go on with the game too, because I know that B&B CompuScience, if I remember, and so we're putting me on the line here as a computer historian, which is kind of scary, but since you would be a better source since you were there. But as I recall, B&B CompuScience, they had some interesting software and hardware choices. They had something called the Manager, which was a database program that was very popular and was used by a number of companies over the years. And also at one point in time, B&B CompuScience owned the Transactor magazine, which I know a lot of people that come to the Personal Computer Museum are familiar with that magazine, or really anybody that had a Commodore type computer in the 80s that was a little bit more on the techie side or wanted to delve into the machine. And also before Imaginet, B&B also did something called the Muppet, which was a networking product for the PET, the PET computer. And I know that Sean, you just on the sister podcast on the OMG Hour, you were recently talking about how Commodore has had a new revitalization with a PET branded smartphone that's just recently come out. And so it was kind of interesting because in order to make these PETs talk together, they were all linked together with this product called the Muppet, which we actually have in one of the drawers upstairs in the museum. So, David, when you come and visit us, hopefully in September, if you're going to be able to make that, we'll actually show you some of the old product that you probably saw laying around. And probably when you were hired, that stuff was maybe on its way out, but that was the way in the new stuff.
Yeah. Now, actually, you're bringing back memories here. Muppet. Yeah, I totally forgotten about that. Transactor. Yeah, that wasn't even on my radar. For this conversation. But yes, I remember them now. I certainly came on board at the time that Imaginet, PCs were out, and they were now spending the money that they earned on their fantastic work with Commodore, and they came up with the concept of the Super Pet, and then. The Commodore folks told them, okay, here's lots of cash, go away, and so the business started for real, and they moved over to the PC side, and I guess it's hard for me to say how much of Muppet involved into Imaginet, but Imaginet was the network that a good friend Jack Cole architected, and he helped get me on board to work with them. So it was Imaginet, and I was primarily involved with. Manager was that was a really great product. Alan Lewis was the primary architect and developer around that piece. He was now or later employed at BlackBerry and took BlackBerry a good long way to where they went, along with in their infrastructure software. And but yeah, it was primarily Imaginet that I worked on, and then initially, writing a few drivers and things like that. But then when the opportunity came up to write the demo, that's where I really got seriously involved. Later on, we did work as well in trying to bring Imaginet forward. It was I'm not sure how much you dug into Imaginet and what it was, but essentially it was a network based on simulating a disk controller, which really sounded cool at the time. Turned out to be not really strategically probably the best thing to do, but at the time it was really cool. So really, you plugged in this card, and your PC didn't know that it was on a network. It thought it had another disk, and it was totally transparent. And so we were writing software for that, and again, like I said, Sopwith was the demo program, and we had to little pieces of software were Imaginet aware, so that we could actually have multiple users play each other on the network. And then later on, we tried to evolve ImagineNet into more, what was coming up. All of a sudden there was, this thing called Ethernet, and then there was Windows, and oh my God, look at all this good stuff. So we spent some time writing a product. This is what I authored. We called it, for lack of a better name, as I'm cringing at the name now, but we called it REMDOS, Remote DOS, and that actually picked up DOS operating system calls on the client and sent them over to the server and actually executed them on the server and then sent the results back. So that is something that I worked on as well. But it's sort of amusing. We take a look at all of this stuff and think, wow, it was really cool ideas at the time. But now we look at the technology, of course, nowadays, and it just wasn't heading in quite the right direction.
What was Sopwith developed in? How did you go about developing? What language were you using when you created Sopwith?
Oh, it was in C++. Okay. Oh, sorry, it's not C++. I'm sorry. Whoa, that was a C. It was C. And,
C, okay.
Just C, yeah. And, geez, I'm trying to remember the actual compiler. We ported it over to Microsoft C later, but I'm trying to remember I can't remember the compiler we used at the time.
And this was on the MS-DOS platform, to be clear what platform that was at the time, because we'd moved away from the Commodore stuff at that point, and you were onto the PC platform. Now, was that, to your recollection, was there many other network-based games out there at that time, or were you really sort of, leading the charge with having multiple computers being able to play a game like this?
To be honest, if they existed, I was ignorant of them, and I think they probably did exist. I was blissfully ignorant, so we treated it as new development at the time. We thought we were developing something cool. So I'm gonna plead ignorance on that one.
That's okay, because that happens a lot. A lot of parallel development exists. I just wondered if that was something that you were aware of at the time, or whether it was really, for you guys, really, this was like pretty amazing, because there really wasn't anything else like this that would allow people to be able to play a game against each other. So obviously today we have things like Xbox Live and PlayStation Plus and things like that on consoles, and of course computers have been networking and playing networking games for years, but not in 1984.
Right. Yeah. And again, like I say, I claim ignorance on knowing what was out there. But we thought certainly that we were innovating at the time. But again, to be honest, what we were driving for was we wanted a cool demo program. You can imagine what would draw people to a booth, watching people enter transactions into a common accounts payable file, or two folks playing a game.
Yeah.
And
it's hard to get excited about, say, WordPerfect or something else. How fast can you write a letter? Yeah. Now, I think too, and if I recall correctly, in the first, because you've made a couple of different versions of this game yourself, and then there's also been some fan-created stuff, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but in the first version, as I recall, there is actually an ending to the game, which is kind of unusual in the sense of most games back in those days were arcade type games that essentially never had an end. Like in Space Invaders, you can never kill all the aliens. They just keep on coming until you finally get overcome, and then you just can't play anymore. But you actually had an ending in the first version, as I recall, if you actually destroyed all the enemy buildings. And so I don't know if you were aware of this or not, but that actually is kind of somewhat innovative, because video games today, for the most part, all have an ending, and they're more like movies or books where they have a beginning, a middle, and an ending. But certainly at that time period, that was uncommon in video games. Yeah,
and it's interesting. We sort of always took that as well, gosh, what are we going to do next? We got to continue the game on, And I mean, part of the reason for the fact that there's being an end was. We were very, very restricted in core in those days. I still call it core. You can tell how old I am, but in memory in those days. And there were also some other technologies we could maybe chat about, but some other systems that we were porting Sopwith to. So we were actually limited to 42K. So Sopwith ran in 42K. And that obviously sort of limits you as to how much gameplay you can have and how long the game can continue. So we had an end. You blew up everything on the ground, and that was it. So we actually sat there and said, okay, what do we do now? Whoa. And then we sort of came up with the idea, well, I know what we'll do. We'll make the thing run faster, and we will make the targets a little more aggressive. They'll shoot back at you and the like. And then we sort of realized that, hey, we now had an infinite game. So we actually thought it was a good thing, to go. And I think my tester extraordinaire, Dave Grouden, fine developer, but spent probably far too much time testing Sopwith, but I really much appreciate it. I think he got it to level 6. I think that was about as far as he got.
According to Wikipedia, he is the reason why you put Ox in the second game.
Yes. Yeah. Dave was and still is, he's he's an amazingly well-built guy. I mean, he's probably 200 and something pounds, and there isn't a wasted cell in there. I mean, he's just very muscular guy. And it was quite humorous because he used to sit across from me. We're a small company. You can imagine sitting, desks facing each other. And he would be testing Sopwith. And as in any game, it's really the body language that counts, right? I mean, it's not how you press. I mean, you really gotta put the lean in when you press that key. And and he used to exaggerate that. It was just a hoot to watch him play that game.
Now, after you did that initial demo, and I imagine the response was fantastic, was that when you decided to make the second one, or sort of what happened after that? Because you mentioned porting the game and things like that. So what sort of happened after that first initial run?
Well, the first initial ones were, I think one of the big differences was, performance of the game. I think if you remember on the first one, for instance, the ground was solid. If you saw the line of the ground between the ground and the sky, it was all solid below the ground line, and that turned out to be very, very costly to render. So we got rid of that, right? And that was a big change from 1 to 2, whatever we got, so the ground became that straight line, and then we started getting fancy with the little things like the gauges that told you how many bombs you had left, and how much gas you had left, and how many lives you had left, and those sorts of things. But really, it was all about performance, and we were always trying to keep the size down. We actually ported Sopwith to 2 other systems. If you can consider the PC Junior another system, we ported it across to the PC Junior, and it had a little ROM slot, and that was the thing that actually limited us to the 42K, because we actually had to have the OS and Sopwith running on a 64K ROM, and we also ported it over to the Atari ST. Which I don't have a whole lot of memories around that. I know it was a little bit crazy at the time, but we did actually get it working.
And was it? It's kind of interesting for I guess B&B as a corporation to sort of depart from Commodore over to the Atari ST, maybe along with even the original founder of Commodore doing the same thing, I guess. So maybe you guys followed along that way. So I just find it interesting because there was such Commodore was such a corporate ally for so long in the beginning part of the company, and so it's interesting that went there. Was the thought to have it as a commercial game that you were going to sell beyond being just the demo for the Imaginet, or was it always sort of meant to be a way to sell Imaginet?
No, it was strictly a demo program, a way to sell Imaginet. I mean, we weren't planning on selling it as a product. It was just a demo product. And actually, I've sort of dreaded the question that I thought might come my way was, how did it get out there? And that's the answer. I don't have an answer to that. I absolutely don't have an answer. I left B&B around in the late 80s to go out on my own, and gosh, it was probably 2000, in the early 2000s. For some reason, I don't know what drove me to do it, but I did a search on Sopwith, the Sopwith game, and all of a sudden I started getting hits. And it was then that I realized that it actually had somehow gotten out. And I haven't found anybody who can tell me how it got out. As far as at some point in time, it got left on a machine somewhere. Yeah. or somebody decided that, hey, this is a cool game that we're gonna put out there, and intentionally did it. I don't know, but yeah, somehow it got out, and it just started getting used, and I was blissfully unaware of it. I was raising kids and doing things during those times, and really just totally lost touch with it until the early 2000s, when I totally surprised.
And most of the lost treasures that we talk about are full commercial games, but this has got to be, one of the more true lost treasures, in the sense that, despite all odds, because the other thing was, of course, is that because it was designed to be used with some proprietary networking, essentially, now, did you actually develop the one-player version then when you did it as well, so that it could be played on its own, or was that done after the fact?
There were no multiple versions that way. I mean,
okay.
It was just whatever arguments you put in the command line, and it either tried playing over the what we called at that time the async port and the serial port, and or would try to find the Imaginet driver and play over Imaginet. But there was only one version of the code.
Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, sorry. I want to kind of go back to when you first discussed creating this game as a demo for Imaginet. What was the inspiration behind creating this specific game?
Well, that's where the memory is a bit foggy, because I was given full reign, which hats off to Bill McLean. He let his people do that, right? It's just go off and do your thing and impress me, and as long as you impressed him, he was very happy and let you continue. It's hard for me to remember each and every step along the way as to why we chose to write it the way we did. Primarily, there's a few things. I've always been a bit of an airplane fanatic. My mom was in the Air Force, so I grew up with airplane spotters guides and things like that, and just the Sopwith Camel was always a favorite airplane of mine. And of course, there's always the Snoopy connection. Everybody knew what a Sopwith Camel was. So
sure.
Yeah. So that, and the reasoning behind the scrolling back and forth, why that type of game rather than something like a Pac-Man or such. I was always interested in writing the games. Oh gosh, I'm trying to remember the names of them. There's something I think it was called Star Raiders or something like that. But the idea of the old tank, like the old tank video games, of where you move a tank around and you'd move the gun around and shoot in different directions and things like that. I always liked those sorts of games.
Like Battlezone, that sort of thing?
Okay, yeah. And so that's really it. But to give you, it's hard for me after 30 years to sit here and say, the exact motivation was, it's hard for me to come up with. But, Sopwith was the result. It was the interest in airplanes, the idea that it had to be something, obviously, that you could play, multi-users against each other. You can't, multi-user Pac-Man. I'm not sure if that would work, but and it just seemed rather obvious. It was also, the other thing was a really fun part of the code was actually writing the computer planes that would fly against you, and that it just seemed to be a game that lent itself to all of those things, where you could play yourself, play against the computer, have other people play against you. It just seemed very natural. And then we were, of course, limited. Then what could we do? Well, at that point in time, I was actually attending graduate school and had just picked up the latest techniques in 3D graphics, and I thought about it and went, nope, no wait,
yeah.
We weren't going to take it that far, and I'm glad we didn't, because I think it would have taken away from the fun of the game.
Now, were you a gamer at the time, or was this something you were kind of just?
No. I wasn't a gamer, never have been a gamer. My kids grew up, of course, we had all the game consoles in the house, and I could never make it past the first bullet in Mario. It was just, I couldn't jump that first bullet. I am so inept at computer games. Obviously in testing Sopwith, I became reasonably good at it, nowhere near as good as Dave Groudon, but no, I am not a gamer, and therefore I really wasn't aware of what was going on around me in the gaming community.
Now, one thing that modern game programmers have access to, one thing among many things that you wouldn't have had at the time would have been things like physics tools and libraries and things like that people may not understand that, when people develop games today, a lot of that hard math and a lot of that stuff is so easily available to them.
Someone else has already done it all for you.
Yeah, and you just kind of say, hey, I want to, this is the kind of physics I want to do, and then there you go. So would you say was the physics part of, like, what was the most challenging part that you recall in terms of getting it just right or getting it the way that you liked it? Was it the physics? Was it the networking aspect? Or what was the biggest challenge for you in the development cycle, would you say, from what you recall?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned the physics, because I am a bit of a scientist as well, but I can't say that the physics of it was a really big thing. I tried to make it as realistic as possible, but let's face it, that Sopwith did some pretty impossible things, and we just laughed about it. The biggest issue was or I guess the two issues were, again, performance and space. It was just how much could you get done in 64K. So you asked, whether, what it was developed in. Well, we started in C, but then as it went along, we moved a lot of the code over to assembler to pick up the speed. Optimizing compilers weren't quite as sophisticated as they are now, and you could actually do things better in assembler. Those are the big things. Always looking for how you could squeeze in another couple of bytes out of the code or out of the data, or how you could reuse something you'd done before. One of the things that took actually a lot of time for, at the time we wondered about the value, but afterwards I think it was cool, was the sound generation. Like, how do we? It wasn't so easy back then. We didn't have libraries and that to play sound, so you actually had to program the sound chip. Right?
and you really only had a single speaker to work with not a lot of range.
Yeah, so that was one of the things I was sort of a little bit proud of. Is how am I going to do this? Because I am not a musician by any means, and so I just wrote a piece of code that took the frequencies of A, B, C, D, E, the various notes, and was able to generate that, and then I would just fire a sequence of notes at the screen, and there was, for instance, the theme song that plays at the beginning, and when there are explosions, or whatever. It was just you passed a stream of notes, so that was something that was sort of neat and really small and really worked well.
Now, are you surprised today at how many actual other variants of Sopwith are available and other fan-made versions? I mean, you kind of come to expect that of games like Tetris or other things that have become, major cultural phenomenon in games, but yours actually has quite an amazing fan following. Are you surprised by that?
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, I'm surprised by the whole thing. I mean, I thought Sopwith had died when I left B&B, and so the whole experience has been it's been overwhelming, and it's been an honor. I get emails, I'm not saying every day, but I will get a few a month around somebody who just thanking me for the game, or a developer. I chuckle at this one, a developer asking me permission if they can develop a variant of it.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I go, well, sure. And my usual response is, can I help you test it?
Yeah.
So, so there's been, it continues. There's been, I guess, about 3 over the last little while, and it's over a little while. I'm saying about the last year and a half. There's 3 variants of where I've been involved in to some capacity or whatever. But it is kind of cool, and it's neat to see how people evolve it as well. There's different. There's the people who want it to be absolutely exactly as it was. So I've been working with a fellow out of Spain recently who's has ported it to actually rewritten it in C++ and Unity 3D, I think it is. But
oh wow.
Or C Sharp actually.
Yep.
But for devices. But he made it absolutely as the original. Like, he wanted every keystroke and every explosion was exactly as it was before. And then you get the person who just says, thank you very much. I'm using it as a motivation, right? So you
an inspiration.
And inspiration. Yeah, that's the proper word. Sorry. And so you get these 2D games first off that are just they're essentially the same game but beautiful 2D graphics, absolutely beautiful stuff. I'm trying to think of some of the names. I think there's one of the Storm Clouds over the Western Front, I think is one of them, and Sopwith Barons, I think is another one. And then you get somebody else who just says, again, is strictly inspiration, but they go, the full 3D route, and it's just, you can tell it's a biplane and it's shooting at other biplanes and targets, but that's it. That's the only commonality. Mm-hmm. There's, I think it's Avian Checkpoint is one that came out of Serbia a little while ago, so I worked on that one a little bit. But it's a hoot. I regret I don't make a penny off of it, but what the heck.
Now the source code is freely available on your website. Is that correct?
It's on my website, but it's elsewhere as well. Yeah.
So is Sopwith.org? Is that your site, your actual official site, or is that somebody else's?
That's someone else. That's a fellow by the name of Simon Howard. Simon was actually the first one that I came across his site back in the early 2000s, and oh my goodness, there's people actually working with this thing, right? So I chatted with him a little bit and supported him and gave him some information, and he was actually tickled that he was talking to the developer, and I was absolutely tickled that somebody would be tickled. But the actual release, I put it out the GPL license. It was actually funny in the early 2000s. I had it on my website, and I got this really scathing email from this person, just essentially accusing me of theft and whatever else. That I was, working at B&B, and I was an employee, and I had no right to claim ownership and whatever. Hey, guy, I never claimed ownership. I could claim I'm a developer of it. And the company had demised by then, and I'd emailed with Bill McLean and said, sir, do you have any concerns with me doing anything with it? And just go do with it what you want. And so I put it out on GPL because I didn't think I was actually going to spend the time to actually develop it myself, and there were folks interested in doing that. So I put it out there, and so I see it. Simon actually put it onto or ported it over to Linux, so it is in the various Linux distros now.
Awesome. So just before we let you go, 30 years after it was created, what keeps you busy today?
What keeps me busy today? Well, okay, I've had a career as a technical director with BlackBerry, and now with a small firm in London, Ontario here at Digital Evidence International. I also still do a little bit of freelance work on the side. The main change in my life is I'm actually pursuing a PhD in astronomy.
Wow.
I got a master's a few years back, and now I'm pursuing a PhD, so I'm doing a lot of software development in astronomy and primarily in astronomical simulations and the like.
So software development, but is Sopwith the only game you've ever developed and the only game you probably will ever develop?
It's the only game, yes. I mean, it's the only serious game. I mean, I've played around with a few things on my own that it's never left my laptop. And I do have, I may make it public domain at some time. I do have a astronomy simulation software, which I don't know if I should tell you what the heck, but I've been playing around with putting a little bit of 3D Sopwith into it just for fun.
Very cool.
So there's a connection there. That's awesome. Well, thank you for your contribution to the video game world, and it's interesting that it wasn't maybe what you were expecting when you developed it, and it's certainly become a cult classic for a lot of people, and maybe those that are listening to the show today will check it out and download it, and you can play it on DOSBox today, or you can play, if you want to play the original and be true to the, or of course if you come to the Computer Museum you could actually see it running on real hardware, which of course is always a treat, or you could of course get one of these other inspired versions or clones on iOS or Android. So awesome. Very good.
David, thanks so much for being on Lost Treasures of Gaming.
Well, thank you very much for the interest. Much appreciated.
This has been an OMGNexus.com production.